On July 1st, 1934, a heavy, shirtless man sat on a metal cot in cell 474 of Stadelheim prison in Munich, his chest covered in old war scars from the Western Front where 3 bullets still remained lodged in his body, and he was staring at a loaded Browning pistol that a guard had placed on the table in front of him with a single instruction. The Führer gives you one last chance to draw the right conclusions. 1 bullet in the chamber. The message was clear. The man picked up the pistol, felt its weight in the same hands that had once built a 3 million-strong army for Adolf Hitler. The same hands that had signed letters closing with the words, "You're Ernst." And then he put it back down and said words that would echo through every history book written about this night. "If Adolf wants me dead, let him come here and do it himself." 15 minutes later, 2 SS officers stepped into the cell and fired 2 shots into his bare chest. And as he slid down the wall with blood mixing with the old scars from a war they had once fought on the same side, he whispered his final words. Mein Führer, mein Führer. His name was Ernst Röhm, and 17 hours earlier he had been the second most powerful man in Germany, the commander of 3 million stormtroopers, and the only person on earth who still called Adolf Hitler by his first name. This is the story of a friendship that built the Third Reich, and a night of mass murder that showed the world what Hitler was willing to do to the people closest to him. Munich, 1919. Germany had just lost the Great War. The Kaiser had abdicated. The economy was collapsing, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers who had spent 4 years in the trenches came home to find everything they fought for was gone. And among these furious veterans was a short, stocky army captain named Ernst Röhm, who had been shot in the face at Verdun, leaving a grotesque permanent scar, shot twice more after that, and who now worked in a shadowy military intelligence unit that monitored radical political groups and maintained secret access to weapons caches and networks of ex-soldiers ready to fight. It was through this work that he encountered a thin, pale nobody named Adolf Hitler who had been sent to spy on a tiny political party in the back rooms of beer halls. And when they met, they had nothing in common on the surface. Hitler was awkward and didn't drink, while Röhm was loud, vulgar, and well-connected. But they shared one thing that bonded them completely: a white-hot fury at what Germany had become, and an absolute conviction that the Democratic Republic had to be destroyed. Here is the truth that most people never learn. Without Röhm, there would have been no Hitler, because Röhm gave him everything he lacked. He raided army depots and funneled weapons to the Nazi Party, introduced Hitler to wealthy donors, and most critically helped create the SA, the Brown Shirts, a paramilitary army of street fighters who beat anyone who opposed the Nazis, terrorized Jews, and projected the image of unstoppable power. Through it all, they grew genuinely close. Röhm was the only person who addressed Hitler with the informal "du," calling him simply Adolf, while everyone else said "Mein Führer." And they wrote each other letters signed "You're Ernst" and "You're Adolf." For a man who kept virtually every other human being at a cold, emotional distance, this was perhaps the only genuine friendship Adolf Hitler ever had. But Röhm never worshipped Hitler. He treated him as an equal rather than a god, and he had his own vision for the revolution, and that independence would eventually cost him everything. The cracks exploded into the open after the beer hall putsch of November 1923. Hitler storming a Munich beer hall with 600 armed men to declare a revolution, Röhm seizing the war ministry, and the entire thing collapsing the next morning when police opened fire, killing 16 Nazis while Hitler fled and was arrested hiding in a friend's attic. Both were tried for treason. Both received light sentences. But during the aftermath, their fundamental disagreement became unresolvable. Hitler in prison realized the revolution had to be won through elections and legal infiltration of the system, while Röhm insisted it required military force, that the SA should become a true army replacing the Reichswehr entirely, with himself as commander. Hitler wanted politics, Röhm wanted war, and the disagreement grew so toxic that by 1925, Röhm resigned from the party and left Germany for a military job in Bolivia, spending 5 years on the other side of the world. But in 1930, with the Great Depression devastating Germany and the SA spiraling out of control under weak leadership, Hitler sent a letter to Bolivia addressed to "My dear Ernst," begging him to return, and Röhm came immediately. Within 2 years, he transformed the SA into a force of 3 million men, 30 times the size of the German army, the largest paramilitary organization on Earth. And this is where the story turns into tragedy, because Röhm had built something so powerful it terrified everyone. The army generals, the industrialists, the politicians. And most dangerously, it was beginning to terrify Hitler himself, because 3 million men loyal to Röhm was not the same as 3 million men loyal to Hitler. When Hitler became chancellor in January 1933, Röhm immediately demanded what he called the Second Revolution. His 3 million stormtroopers would absorb the professional army, and he would become supreme military commander of the new Germany. The Prussian officer corps was horrified and delivered Hitler an ultimatum: "Control Röhm, or we will never support you." And Hitler needed that support desperately because President Hindenburg was dying. And when he died, Hitler planned to merge president and chancellor into a single supreme position. But this required the army to swear a personal oath to him, and the generals would only do so if the SA was neutralized. Hitler tried compromise, arranging a deal where the SA would handle civilian training while the army kept exclusive military control. But Röhm walked out of that meeting and told his lieutenants something that sealed his fate. "What that ridiculous corporal says means nothing to us. I have not the slightest intention of keeping this agreement. Hitler is a traitor and must go on a long holiday." Those words reached Hitler within days, carried by 2 men who had been waiting for exactly this ammunition: Hermann Göring, who wanted military power for himself and saw Röhm as a rival, and Heinrich Himmler, whose SS was technically subordinate to Röhm's SA, a situation he found intolerable. Together, they launched a campaign to destroy Röhm, feeding Hitler intelligence reports claiming the SA was planning a coup, that Röhm was stockpiling weapons, that SA leaders mocked Hitler at parties, and weaponizing Röhm's homosexuality by circulating it to conservative generals to make him an embarrassment Hitler could more easily discard. The pressure became unbearable from every direction. The dying Hindenburg threatened martial law, the generals repeated their ultimatum, the industrialists warned of economic collapse. And at the center of it all stood Hitler being forced to choose between his oldest friend and absolute power. The operation was codenamed Hummingbird, and what happened between June 30th and July 2nd, 1934, would become known as the Night of the Long Knives. The timing was calculated. Röhm had sent the entire SA on mandatory leave for July and retreated with his closest lieutenants to the Hanselbauer Hotel in Bad Wiessee, a quiet Bavarian lakeside resort, expecting nothing worse than a new round of negotiations. He had no idea that the talking was over and that Hitler had already signed the kill lists. In the early hours of June 30th, Hitler boarded a plane to Munich in a state witnesses described as barely controlled fury. Face white, hands trembling, no sleep. and drove with a convoy of SS men through the darkness to Bad Wiessee, arriving at the hotel at 6:30 in the morning while everyone was still asleep. Hitler personally stormed inside, marched down the corridor, kicked open Röhm's door, and found his oldest friend still in bed, screaming at him that he was a traitor while SS men swarmed through the hotel dragging SA leaders from their rooms, some found with male companions, which was immediately used as propaganda justification. Within minutes, every senior SA officer was under arrest and driven to Stadelheim prison. But Bad Wiessee was only the beginning, because simultaneously across Germany, kill squads activated in Berlin, Silesia, and every major city with orders to eliminate not just SA leaders, but anyone on lists that had been expanded to include old political enemies, inconvenient allies, and people who simply knew too much. Former Chancellor von Schleicher was shot dead in his home along with his wife. Gregor Strasser, once a senior Nazi, was shot in his cell at Gestapo headquarters. Gustav von Kahr, who had helped crush the beer hall putsch 11 years earlier, was hacked to death with axes. A music critic named Willy Schmid was murdered in front of his family because the killers confused his name with someone else on the list. For 3 days, Germany became a killing field where armed men in black uniforms executed people without trial, without evidence, without any pretense of law, and the official death toll was given as 85, though historians believe it exceeded 200. For 24 hours after the arrests, Hitler hesitated over Röhm's fate, and this hesitation reveals something important. This was not a stranger. This was the man who had stood beside him since 1919, who had armed the movement when it had nothing, who called him Adolf when everyone else called him Führer. Göring and Himmler pushed relentlessly, arguing that leaving Röhm alive was dangerous, and finally, on the afternoon of July 1st, Hitler authorized the killing but insisted Röhm be given the chance to do it himself. One last gesture of respect, or perhaps one last act of cruelty disguised as mercy. The pistol was placed on the table. Röhm refused to use it, and SS officers Theodor Eicke and Michael Lippert entered the cell and shot him dead. The aftermath revealed the true purpose of everything that had happened. On July 13th, Hitler stood before the Reichstag and declared himself supreme judge of the German people, announcing the killings were necessary to save the nation. And every member rose and applauded. A law was passed retroactively declaring all the murders legal acts of self-defense. Within weeks, Hindenburg died. The army swore its oath to Hitler personally. Himmler's SS was elevated to independent status free from the SA forever. And the 3 million-strong brown-shirt army that Röhm had built was castrated into a ceremonial organization that would never challenge anyone again. Hitler had traded his oldest friend for absolute power and got exactly what he paid for. Because the night of the long knives was the moment every general, every politician, every ally understood with perfect clarity that if Hitler could do this to the man who had been at his side since the beginning, the man who called him Adolf, then no one was safe, no one was irreplaceable, and no friendship meant anything when it stood between Adolf Hitler and power. In the years that followed, the regime erased Ernst Röhm from the history of the movement he helped create. His name removed from records, his photographs destroyed. But the letters survived. Your Ernst and your Adolf. And they remain as evidence of something the mythology of the Third Reich tried very hard to bury. That the most evil man of the 20th century once had a friend, and that he killed him, not because he had to, but because power mattered more than loyalty, more than gratitude, more than 15 years of shared struggle, more than the only human being who ever dared call him by his first name. The pistol on the table remained untouched. Röhm never gave Hitler the satisfaction.